The Crying Woman of Ravenwood Asylum, America.
The Appalachian forests of West Virginia are ancient, dark, and filled with shadows that seem to move with a life of their own. Among the winding roads and misty valleys, Ravenwood Asylum sits on a hill, a decaying structure of red brick and iron bars. Built in the late 1800s, it was once a place meant to care for the mentally ill, but history would brand it as a house of suffering. Overcrowded wards, cold walls, and cruel treatments left scars not only on the bodies of its patients, but also in the very air surrounding the building. Today, Ravenwood is abandoned, but the echoes of its past still linger, waiting for those willing or foolish enough to listen. I first heard about Ravenwood from a fellow truck driver. He spoke of a pale woman kneeling by the gates at night, crying softly, her hair hanging in long, dark strands over her face. Locals refused to approach after dusk, whispering about her relentless sobs, warning that anyone who stayed near the ruins would be haunted for life. Skeptical, I dismissed it as legend. But one rainy night, while driving through the valleys of West Virginia, I found myself near Ravenwood, and curiosity nodded me. The fog hung thick between the trees, muffling sound and light, and the ruins of the asylum loomed ahead like a dead ship on the hillside. I parked my truck and stepped out, the crunch of gravel beneath my boots echoing in the still night. The first thing I noticed was the sound. Soft, wet, human crying carried across the courtyard, cutting through the wind like a blade. I stopped, straining my ears. The sobs were irregular, sometimes barely audible, then growing louder as if someone were walking closer. I moved forward cautiously, the air chilling around me. The windows were shattered, the doors hanging open on rusted hinges, yet the sounds seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere, all at once. Each sob struck me in the chest. I realized quickly this was not ordinary grief. There was something almost intelligent in the rhythm, a cadence that seemed to mimic my own breathing. Inside, the asylum was worse than I imagined. Corridors stretched endlessly, peeling wallpaper and broken floorboards creating shadows that seemed to crawl along the walls. I could hear dripping water somewhere deep within the building, but the crying remained constant, drawing me forward. It was then I saw her, Clara, or whoever this spirit had become. She knelt by a collapsed wall, her body trembling with inconsolable sadness, hair veiling her face, gown tattered and streaked with mud. Her sobs were silent now, yet I felt them in my chest, in my head, in my bones. I wanted to look away, to run, but the pull was irresistible. As I moved closer, I noticed details that made my stomach twist. Her hands were clawed and pale, knuckles cracked, gripping the stones as if she could dig herself free. When she raised her head slightly, I glimpsed her eyes beneath the hair hollow and dark, not human. And then came the sound, not a cry this time, but a voice, whispering words I could not understand, yet I felt them in my mind. She was reaching, calling, demanding something I could not provide, yet could not ignore. I stumbled backward, my foot hitting a loose tile. She vanished. The corridor was empty, yet the weight of her presence pressed against my chest like a stone. The legend of Ravenwood says that Clara was committed in the 1930s, locked away for grief-induced hysteria after losing her children. She was ignored, starved, and left to die in solitary confinement. Her death left an imprint so strong that the building itself became a vessel for her sorrow. People who visited later report hearing footsteps, crying, and voices calling their names. Some claim that the asylum seems to shift, corridors elongating or looping back on themselves, as though it were alive. I felt this firsthand. Every turn I took led me deeper into darkness, each doorway opening onto another corridor I had passed before. The cries followed me, echoing in impossible directions, growing louder as panic consumed me. By the third hour, I realized I could not leave. My truck, parked where I thought I had entered, was gone. Or perhaps it had never been there. Time and space seemed distorted. I was trapped in the asylum's echo, a visitor in a tomb of sorrow, and Clara's presence was undeniable. I could see her now in fleeting glimpses at the edges of my vision, kneeling in corners, standing silently in doorways, moving through walls as though reality itself bent to her will. Every sob, every whisper, every cold gust of air reminded me that she was not simply a memory. She was aware, intelligent, patient, and eternal. I screamed, calling out to her, begging her to leave me be. The response was immediate. The sobbing intensified, becoming a roar that seemed to shake the walls and floor. I fell to my knees, covering my ears, but the sound penetrated every part of me. My mind swam with images of her children, lost, torn from her grasp, and I understood the depth of her grief. It was not just sadness. It was a hunger, a need to reclaim what was stolen, and she would not stop until she was acknowledged. When dawn finally broke, I found myself outside, collapsed on the gravel, wet and shivering. The asylum stood silent, sun glinting on its broken windows, yet I could still feel her presence, lingering like a shadow at the edge of vision. I returned to my truck, hands trembling, and drove away, vowing never to return. But even now, in my home miles away from Ravenwood, I hear it sometimes, the soft, wet crying in the middle of the night. Just beyond my door, a reminder that Clara never left. She is eternal, and her grief cannot be quenched. Some nights, I lie awake, listening. The wind carries faint echoes, the cry of a woman whose sorrow has no end. And in those moments, I feel her watching, patient and eternal, waiting for the next soul to wander too close. Ravenwood is not merely a ruin. It is a vessel of grief, a memory that refuses to fade, a warning that some suffering transcends death. And I know, in the quietest hours of the night, that she will cry forever, and some part of me will always listen.
Come!
Countryside. Blackwood Church had long been forgotten by maps and parish records alike. Its stones were slick with moss, and the bell tower leaned slightly, as though weighed down by centuries of secrets. Locals in the nearby village rarely ventured near it after dusk, warning travelers of strange tolling that came at midnight, even when no one was present to ring the bells. Some said it was the wind. Others whispered of the dead, calling their own back from the earth. I did not believe these stories at first. Yet when I arrived in the village, one fog-laden evening, curiosity outweighed caution, and the church drew me in like a magnet. The path to Blackwood Church was narrow and overgrown, flanked by gnarled trees that bent toward each other as if conspiring. The air smelled of damp soil and decayed leaves, and the mist that curled over the hills seemed unusually thick. As I approached the churchyard, the gravestones rose like jagged teeth from the fog, etched with names so faded they were nearly unreadable. The tower loomed above me, dark and silent, yet somehow alive, as though it breathed with the wind. My footsteps echoed along the uneven stone path, and I felt a growing sense of being watched. It began subtly. I noticed the shadows moving differently than the fog. There was a rhythm to them, as though they swayed in time with a bell that I could not hear. I told myself it was imagination, but the feeling intensified. As the sun disappeared completely behind the hills, a chill settled over the churchyard, and the first toll rang out. Not from the turret. Bell remained silent, but from somewhere deep within the fog, resonant and bone-shaped. I froze, staring at the top of the tower. The night was still, except for the tolling that continued, uneven, almost deliberate. I stepped inside the church. The door groaned as it opened, revealing a nave thick with dust and the scent of mildew. Pews were cracked and splintered, yet arranged neatly, as if awaiting a congregation that would never arrive. The air was unnaturally cold, and my breath formed small clouds in the dim light of the moon filtering through shattered stained glass. At the far end, the altar remained, untouched by time. But above it, in the shadows of the loft, I saw a figure, a man in the darkened bell tower. He was tall, his head bent, hands gripping a rope that moved of its own accord. The tolling continued, each strike reverberating through my chest, though I knew the bell could not move without a living hand. The stories of Blackwood Church began to make sense then. In the 18th century, the parish had been struck by plague. A bell-ringer, tasked with tolling the hour for funerals and warnings, reportedly disappeared during one such midnight toll. Villagers claimed that he was cursed, bound to the church for eternity, his soul trapped between earth and heaven. Since that time, anyone near the church at night would hear the tolling, sometimes accompanied by the ghostly sound of footsteps along the tower stairs, though no one was there to climb them. As I moved closer to the tower stairs, the air grew heavier. Each step creaked beneath me, though the wood was ancient and weak. The tolling slowed, then accelerated, as if urging me upward. At the top, I found the loft empty, the rope swinging gently as though it had just been released. My heartbeat pounded in my ears, and then I heard a voice, low and hollow, whispering my name. It came from nowhere and everywhere at once. He spun around, but the loft remained empty. Shadows pooled in the corners, and I felt an invisible presence brush against my shoulder, cold and weightless. Night after night, I returned to the church, compelled by something I could not explain. Each visit revealed more. Faint outlines of figures in the pews, kneeling in prayer, though no one was there. The faint sound of singing, garbled and sorrowful, drifting through the cracked, stained glass. The bell tolling always at midnight, even when I left before the hour. Locals told me I was foolish to linger, that the church had claimed more than one curious soul, but I could not resist. There was a rhythm to the tolling, a pull that made me feel that the bell-ringer sought something beyond the dead, something he could not reach on his own. One evening, as fog rolled down the hills and moonlight fractured through the broken windows, I ascended the tower again. The tolling began, slower this time, deliberate. I gripped the railing and peered down. Shadows danced on the walls in patterns, too precise to be random. And then, from the darkness, two hollow eyes stared back at me from the doorway. A figure stepped forward, not moving its mouth. Yet I heard a whisper in my mind. Ring. For them, I did not understand what it meant. I could feel the weight of centuries pressing on me. I realized then that the bell-ringer had never been alone, that each toll carried not only the dead but the living, luring them into the churchyard, binding them to the rhythm of the bell. Panic surged, and I stumbled down the stairs, but the tolling did not stop. It followed me, echoing in the village streets, resonating in my chest long after I had fled the church. Even now, years later, I cannot forget it. On quiet nights, when the wind moves just so through the hills of Blackwood, I hear the tolling of a bell that does not exist. I see shadows at the edges of my vision, figures kneeling in impossible silence. The hollow eyes of the bell-ringers seem to follow me, reminding me that some duties transcend death, that some curses endure, and that even the living can be caught in the rhythm of the dead. I never returned to Blackwood Church. I cannot. But sometimes, when the fog is thick, and the wind carries faint sounds, I close my eyes and hear the bell tolling once more. It is not a sound meant for ears. It is a sound that penetrates the mind, wrapping around thoughts, tugging at the soul. And I know, with a certainty that chills me even in the safety of my home, that the bell-ringer waits still, patient, eternal, calling for more than just the dead.
The Bell-Ringer of Blackwood Church, England.
Come!
In the fading light of evening, Panam City sat in silence, its red-bricked houses crumbling under the weight of centuries. Once a thriving center of merchants and trade, the city had long been abandoned, leaving only ghosts of its past behind. Visitors rarely ventured into its narrow lanes after dusk, and those who did spoke of a cold unease that settled in the chest, a whispering wind that seemed to carry voices from nowhere. It was said that the city's wealth had attracted more than traders. It had attracted envy, violence, and death, and the walls had remembered it all. I had never been drawn to haunted places, never considered myself one to fall prey to superstition. Yet when I arrived in Narayangang, the stories of Panam City whispered themselves into my mind. Local shopkeepers warned me not to wander the ruins, muttering under their breath about hollow eyes and figures that watched from the shadows. The first evening, curiosity overcame caution, and I found myself stepping past the moss-covered gates into the deserted city. The sun was a dying ember, casting long, skeletal shadows across narrow streets and broken courtyards. The air smelled of damp earth and decayed wood, and my footsteps echoed unnaturally loud on the stone pathways. It began subtly. I first noticed the sensation of being watched, though there was no one in sight. Windows stared down at me, empty holes framed by cracked plaster. Yet I could swear the darkness within them shifted when I looked away. A faint breeze carried the scent of something metallic, like rusted iron, or perhaps dried blood. I turned to leave, but the streets seemed to twist behind me, unfamiliar, as though the city itself had changed its layout. By the second evening, the atmosphere had grown heavier. I ventured further, drawn by a strange compulsion I could not explain. In the corner of one courtyard, I glimpsed a figure, tall, gaunt, standing motionless beneath a shattered archway. Its face was obscured, but the eyes were hollow, empty black voids that seemed to pierce directly into my chest. My breath caught. I blinked. When I looked again, it was gone. Panic rose in my throat, but a part of me could not turn away. The city had a way of anchoring attention, of luring the observer into the center of its ruin. The nights that followed were worse. I began to hear footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoing behind me. I would spin around, expecting to confront anyone, but only shadows responded. And always, in those shadows, the hollow eyes watched. They appeared at windows, in doorways, sometimes crouched near broken staircases, or perched atop crumbling walls. They never moved toward me directly, yet the sensation of being drawn forward, of being invited deeper into the ruins, became impossible to resist. It was on the third night that I saw the city fully awake. In the courtyard of what had once been a merchant's home, I glimpsed a woman in tattered clothing, her skin pallid as moonlight, hair tangled and long. She knelt beside a broken fountain, her hands clawing at the stone as though trying to pull something from beneath it. Her eyes were hollow, black voids like the others, yet they burned with intent. She lifted her head slowly, and though her lips did not move, I heard a voice echo in my mind, whispering my name. It was not a threat, nor a plea, it was a summons. Kheya anchored me to the spot, yet the hollowness of her gaze penetrated every rational thought. I stumbled backward, nearly falling over a collapsed wall, and when I turned, the courtyard was empty. The air smelled sharp, acrid, like iron, and the oppressive silence returned, but I could not shake the impression that she and the others were still watching, waiting. I tried to leave, retracing my steps to the entrance gates, but the city seemed to stretch infinitely. Streets I had passed earlier now ended in walls or vanished into darkness. Every doorway I approached seemed to lead back to another courtyard, and in every window the hollow eyes stared. My mind began to reel with the impossibility of it all. I realized then that Panam City was not simply abandoned. It was alive in a way I could not understand, conscious of my presence, shaping itself around me, feeding on my fear. By the fourth night, I was no longer exploring. I was fleeing. Yet each step forward was met with impossible loops and dead ends. In the corners of my vision, figures crouched, watched, and vanished. I stumbled into a great hall, the largest building in the city. Its roof collapsed, and here I finally understood the truth. Every shadow I had glimpsed, every hollow-eyed figure, was not human. They were echoes, remnants of lives extinguished in the city over centuries. Merchants, servants, children, each one trapped in a void, each one hungering for attention. And when I looked directly into their hollow eyes, I felt the pull, an irresistible compulsion to kneel, to join them, to surrender my own sight to the emptiness. I fought it, screaming silently into the night, until exhaustion allowed me to stumble back to the gates. The city did not release me willingly. The shadows seemed to cling to my heels, their hollow eyes boring into the edges of my vision. I crossed the threshold as the first light of dawn broke, and only then did the pressure in my chest ease. I have not returned to Panam City since, but the experience left its mark. I often awaken in the middle of the night, certain I see hollow eyes in the corners of my room. Occasionally, in photographs of abandoned buildings, I notice a dark figure in the background, crouched or leaning, its eyes empty, watching. And an Panam City does not forget. It waits. It watches. And the hollow eyes never close. Some nights, when the wind carries the scent of damp brick or rotting wood, I swear I hear whispers, faint and insistent, calling me back. I do not go. I will not go. But Panam City will wait, and one day, It will come for me in its own way.